The start of the college football season is almost here, which means it's time to lock in our final playoff predictions before the 2024 season begins. We've been predicting our playoff field since probably January, but that was Fantasyland. Now it's time to get realistic. Welcome in to SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. John, I'm not sure when you put your first playoff musings out there, but I think mine was in late January. At that time, I was just making my SEC playoff picks, but even just from an SEC standpoint, I feel like my picks have evolved in the 7 months since. Have you went back and reflected at all on your initial playoff projections and kind of thought about how maybe they've changed in these past 7 months? Because I mean, January really is the time when anything seems possible previous season. But when you get to this point in the calendar, it's like, all right, no more crazy ideas. It's time to buckle down and get serious with these picks.
Yeah, and I'm buckled down and very, very serious.
I could tell.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've changed mine in the last few weeks. Reevaluated, and also there's some things that have happened with injuries to some players that factored into my decision. Looking a little harder at the schedule, and maybe some of the transfers, how they would fit in. It's really a guessing game on that, and that's why I would encourage everyone to bet on underdogs early in the season. That's my money-making tip for the
Money-making
week.
tip from a guy who I know does not sports gamble. You're on the sidelines in this
Yeah, but
conversation.
I know I don't physically do it, but spiritually I'm there.
And what's your theory on bet on the underdogs early? Is that because there's so many transfers, so many fresh faces, or what's the thought on that?
Yes, transfers. That's really a mixed bag. You just don't know what you're getting with transfers. I think so many transfers are overrated. They jump in the transfer portal and they gain an extra star by their name. It just happens. It's almost involuntary. So I look at that, and so I think also the odds makers are a little off early. They have a hard time adjusting initially. So it's kind of a guessing game for him. You give them a few weeks and they pretty much have it nailed down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you had some discipline, you'd try to make your money in September, and then you could shut down your betting by October. But discipline and sports gambling don't really go hand in hand, from what I've observed.
No, I was talking to a friend who said he hadn't hit a prop bet all summer on baseball, but he's looking forward to football. I assume his intent is to win that back and more in football.
I am sure he believes he's due.
Yes, don't they all?
Well, we're due for our final playoff pick. So here's how we're going to do it. We will cycle through our automatic bids first. And as you probably recall, the 12-team playoff format this year, 5 of the 12 bids will go to the conference champions. In theory, that would be the Power 4 conference champions, 1 each for each of those Power 4 leagues. And then whatever the best group of 5 champion is as determined by the selection committee. And then that leaves 7 at-large bids. So we'll begin with our automatic bids. John and I will probably have some overlap, but we have not compared notes. So for all we know, we could be drastically different as well. John, let's start with the group of 5 bid. This one is maybe one of the more interesting aspects of the 12-team playoff as far as I'm concerned, because you know the group of 5 is going to get a seat at the table, but you don't necessarily know what conference that team is going to come from. Most likely, you know, your 2 strongest group of 5 conferences are generally viewed as the American and the Mountain West, but that doesn't mean if a team goes undefeated in the Sun Belt or Conference USA or the MAC that you couldn't get the bid. So like I said, as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the funner aspects of the 12-team playoff. It's not going to matter in the end. You're not going to have a group of 5 team playing for the national championship, but perhaps you could see a G5 team pull a first-round upset. So where are you looking for your group of 5 automatic bid?
Well, before I reveal that, is this a good idea? I mean, do we really need this? I wonder if we're better off with more large bids and just automatically assuming the group of five deserves a seat at the table.
John, did you disappear and have you been replaced by a Greg Sankey clone? Because this sounds like a line straight from Birmingham here. Who needs these automatic bids? Just
Well, it,
at-large bids earmarked for the SEC.
well, no, I still believe in conference champions, but I just I think this could vary, and from one year to the next. Sometimes there may be a deserving team, but couldn't they be in the pool for the larger? I've just been looking at these at those conferences,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody really sticks out to me
See, I
as
like the
a
little guy. I like a bid for the. If you're going to go to 12 team, it'd be different if they would have went to an 8-team playoff. If it's 8-team, there's not enough bids to go around at that point to justify reserving a spot for the group of five. But with 12 bids, I don't know. I'm not going to feel that sorry for you if you're the fifth best team in the Big Ten and you didn't get a bid and a group of five got a spot ahead of you. If you don't like it, be the third or fourth best team in the Big Ten and get an at-large bid. Otherwise, I'm not. I don't got time for those tiers.
well, I'm not. I'm really not. I'm certainly not anti little guy. I was just kind of throwing that out there. Uh,
Really? Yeah. Tell me
yeah,
a
yeah.
time where you've stuck up for the little guy. I hear a lot of pro SEC coming from you.
Let me get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
all
right.
right. Yeah,
All right.
I'll check my notes. I've got a big notebook here with a lot of
I
stuff
feel
in
like you could probably fit it all on a post-it. The times you've stuck up
it.
for the little guy, but you got a little guy in mind here for this
It's
this.
all right here on this. Yeah, I'm leaning toward Boise State.
Okay, that'll be a popular choice. I think I saw Boise State. They got that 5-star transfer from Southern Cal, who I mean, the popular belief was he was going to be their starting quarterback. He'd been the backup last year at USC as a, one of the backups last year as a true freshman, but he was a 5-star, Malachi Nelson. But he didn't win the job. It was Maddox Madsen, the sophomore, uh, who won the job. So that was a little puzzling to me, but yeah, Boise State, heavy favorite in the Mountain West. The thing I like about them, and they're not my pick, but they were a team I strongly considered. The thing I like about them is they play Washington State and Oregon State, two beatable opponents, I think. But because of the name, because those are two schools that used to be in the Pac-12, I think you can earn a little polish on your resume by beating those teams. Even though, like I said, I don't think either of those programs is going to be that good this year. I think that goes a little bit further than maybe beating a run-of-the-mill group of five opponent. So the fact that they have a couple games against Washington State and Oregon State, and they play Oregon. I don't expect them to beat Oregon, but if they can hold their own against Oregon and they beat Washington State, they beat Oregon State, I think they'd be well on their way to a pretty good resume for the group of five bid.
Yeah, I think part of this has to do with track record and image. The way I like Boise State when it was a little guy, even littler, more little than it is now. And because it beat some really good teams. I still remember that bowl game victory over Oklahoma. Entertaining program, and it's a different kind of program now. But I do think I kind of just still like it. They've got some tradition there. They seem to play well sometimes against these supposedly bigger programs. I don't know how much bigger Oregon State and Washington State are that you mentioned, but they did have that group of five, label with them at one time. Not anymore, but that gives you some credibility. So I agree with your thinking on that. And it was kind of by default though that I picked Boise State.
And they finished last season better than they started as well. So they kind of went into the finish line hot. They lost their bowl game, but they'd won several in a row before that. Yeah, they were on my finalist list, I guess, for the group of five bid, but I'm going with Memphis, the favorite in the American conference. I think Liberty might have the best chance of going undefeated from the G5 ranks, but considering what happened to Liberty in their bowl game last year against Oregon, they got humiliated, and they typically play an incredibly easy schedule. I don't think the committee is going to give Liberty another shot. I mean, you're not supposed to have overlap from one year to the next and be held accountable for what happened in the previous season. But come on, you can't tell me that doesn't seep into the thinking what happened the previous year. And what happened at the end of last season was Liberty got beat 45-6 by Oregon in a bowl game. So I don't care if Liberty does go undefeated. I think the committee is going to look elsewhere. And I look at Memphis as the favorite in the American. They play Florida State in week 3. So I think they need to be, semi-competitive against Florida State. Don't get totally crushed. But if they can handle their business in the conference, which I think they can, I think they'd be a pretty good candidate for that G5 bid. They got a pretty veteran team. Their quarterback, Seth Hennigan, he's been there for a long time. Seems like he's a pretty good quarterback, better than some Power 4 quarterbacks. They won 10 games last year. They went 10-3. One of their losses was to Missouri by just a touchdown, and we know Missouri went on to have a really nice season. They beat Iowa State. Memphis did in their bowl game. So I like Boise State, but I like Memphis a little bit better. So that's where I'm going with my G5 bid. And how interesting that would be, John, within the state of Tennessee, if Tennessee does not make the playoff and Memphis, as an auto bid from the G5, does. How do you think that would go over in Knoxville?
Well, I think that brings us back to our my initial question when I asked, do these little guys really deserve a seat at the table this year? Yeah, Memphis. My decision was between Memphis and Boise State, and there's similar situations. They have non-conference games. I like Boise's schedule better with a chance to impress. Of course, they have to win the games, like you mentioned, Oregon State and Washington State. However, they play Oregon and Memphis plays Florida State. And those are games in which winning isn't a must, but not getting blown out, I think, is a must. And that's certainly an advantage they have over Liberty. You brought up a good point. This is supposed to be a one-year deal. We're not supposed to look back and say, well, that team, they didn't do well in their bowl game last year. I'm going to hold that against them this year when I'm on the selection committee. You're not supposed to look at it that way, but you can't help, but you should factor into that into it, because when you look at a team and say Liberty's rolls through its regular season schedule, it's unbeaten, does very well, but then comes up against different competition and kind of gets manhandled.
Mm-hmm.
How can you not consider that? It just happened. I know it's a different season, a different team, but it makes an impression. And I guess I don't know, I still penalize the group of 5 teams because of Cincinnati not being able to move the ball when it made the playoff.
Yeah, but they were playing one of the best teams in the nation there. I think this G5 bid, they're not going to be playing number 1. They're going to be playing, number 5 or number 6. So I do think that's a little bit different. And I also think, as you consider in history, I think that is a feather in Boise State's cap. They've played in those big bowl games. They've won some of those big bowl games. And then even, as I said, Memphis last year, Iowa State, that's a program that typically finishes middle of the pack in the Big 12. They had a winning record last year, and Memphis beat them, and they went toe-to-toe with Missouri. So I do think when it comes to that G5 bid, I don't care what the rules say about how you're not supposed to consider previous seasons. I guarantee you the committee is going to do it, because what they don't want is to set up another Oregon Liberty scenario where the final score is 45-6. All right, let's get to some of our Power 4 automatic bids, John. Let's start with the ACC. I think one of the more interesting conference races, Florida State and Clemson, are viewed as the 2 frontrunners, but there are a handful of wild cards I think that will be in the mix as well. And I'm actually going with one of those wild cards of claiming the automatic bid. I know Miami is an easy target for jokes because of the way Mario Cristobal threw away that game against Georgia Tech last season, but when you look at the talent assembled at Miami, it's pretty darn good this year. Cristobal had a nice haul out of the transfer portal that includes Cam Ward, the former star quarterback at Washington State. I think Miami's got one of the best rosters in the ACC. I also like their schedule. They don't play Clemson during the regular season, and they get to host Miami. So I'd say Miami looks kind of like that number 3 team on paper when you look at the rankings in the ACC, but I'm actually going with Miami as the ACC champion to get the automatic bid.
Yeah, I think that I like Cam Ward, so yeah, I can see that. I can't get that last play for Miami. I don't even remember which game it gave away last year.
It was the Georgia Tech game.
Georgia Tech, yeah. Well, that makes it look even worse. Yeah, that's hard to get out of your head. So you're saying you think Miami will win the ACC?
I think they'll win the ACC. Now, I don't know what they do against Florida in week 1, but that's not going to affect my pick for them to win the ACC. And I'm not saying they're going to get the at-large bid. I think they're going to win the conference. So, forget what they do in the non-conference. I think they win the ACC and snatch that automatic bid for the league. And it might be the only bid for a league. We've talked before, the ACC could be a one-bid league. So winning the conference championship, I think, takes on even greater importance in that league than it does, say, in the Big Ten or the SEC, which is bound to get multiple bids.
Yeah, okay. In the ACC, I would still go with Florida State. I think Mike Norvell's a better coach than Mario Cristobal. I also think both programs are doing it well NIL-wise. I just think there's probably overall Florida State has a better roster. Our last memory of Florida State was being ransacked by Georgia, which really wasn't a fair assessment because of what all had happened and all the attrition. But I'll just go with Florida State because of, again, a lot of that has to do with I just think recent history where Mike Norvell has got that program going now. And you don't consider Clemson. So would you have Florida State? I'm just curious. Would you have Florida State ahead of Clemson in the ACC?
I would. Yeah, I would. And my hesitance with Florida State, I think, more comes down to the schedule. I mentioned I really like Miami's schedule, which doesn't include Clemson. It also doesn't include SMU, which I think will be one of the better teams in the ACC. Florida State's got to play Clemson, Miami, and SMU just in the conference. And then out of the conference, which won't affect their ability to get to the conference championship game, but does, affect sort of wear and tear on your team. Out of the conference, they have to play Notre Dame and Florida. So I think Florida State's got a more intense schedule, I guess I would say. Both teams play Florida, but top to bottom, I think Florida State's schedule is tougher. If it's just a one-off game on a neutral field, I might kind of like Florida State. I guess I was just thinking about who I feel strongest about making the ACC championship game. And when I look at Miami's schedule, I think they got a pretty good path to get there. Now, what happens when they get there if they play Florida State? I don't know. I might pick Florida State in that game, but I'm not convinced Florida State will make it to that game because even though I think they have one of the best rosters in the conference, if not the very best, I think their schedule is significantly harder than a lot of their peers.
Yeah, that's fair.
Let's go next down to your let's go next to your favorite conference. Maybe I'm overstepping here, but I know how much you like the Big 12, and it really doesn't matter what members are in it. I mean, whether they're playing games down in Mexico or inviting in UCF, BYU, you like Mr. P.T. Barnum, Brett Yormark, what he's doing in that conference, I can tell. You got a soft spot for Oklahoma State. You always have. You've been trying to get them into the SEC for about 3 years now.
With so I'm going to let you bat.
With no success, yeah. I'm going to let you bat leadoff here because I know how much you like the Big 12. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if I learned at some point that you had an NIL sponsorship with the Big 12, but you've not disclosed that yet. Apparently, it's just genuine affection.
I do have an affinity for the state of Oklahoma in general. I'll admit to that. I do like Oklahoma. Um, and I kind of like Cowboys. My nickname as a kid was Cowboy. So
Okay.
it's easy for me to pick on. And you stole my thunder by bringing up Oklahoma State, but that's who I like to win the conference. Mike Gundy's gotten it done for a long time there. Has a great running back. Um, it's played well in some big games through the years under Gundy. So, yeah, I really like Oklahoma State to win that conference. I know some people like Utah. You might like Utah, but I like Oklahoma State.
No, this is the first one we're in lockstep on. I got Oklahoma State as well to win the conference. I mean, you remove Oklahoma and Texas from their schedule, and I think suddenly Oklahoma State gets a better record. Not that they can't beat those programs. They could occasionally beat those programs, beat Oklahoma last season, but taking them off the schedule, I think immediately improves Oklahoma State's standing in the Big 12. I mean, I think they were the second best team in the conference last year and reached the Big 12 championship game where they lost to Texas. Well, I don't have to worry about Texas anymore. It's a veteran team on both sides of the ball, a lot of upperclassmen. You mentioned Ollie Gordon, who's the best running back not only in the Big 12, probably the best running back in the country. And in so much as a running back gets Heisman buzz, I think he will be the running back to attract a little bit this year. They don't have the best quarterback in the conference, but I think top to bottom, they're as solid as any program in the league. I think that's the league marked by the most parity. And jokes aside, I wonder if that's one reason why you're drawn to that conference the way that you are, because there is so much parity in there. So it's kind of, I think when we think of how many candidates could win a conference, I could probably come up with about 6 teams you can make a realistic case for in the Big 12. I don't know if there's another conference where you could make that case. I mean, there's a lot of playoff caliber teams in the SEC, but could you really make an argument for 6 teams winning the conference championship in the SEC? No, I don't think you could. I think the Big 12 probably has as many conference championship contenders as any conference, but we're both going with Oklahoma State.
Yeah, and I think one thing that will help the possibility for an enlarged team as well is that strength of schedule, that the Big 12 strength of schedule, because there's a lot of parity. And so you could be playing a number of teams with winning records. And I think that could boost your stock with the selection committee because it will be a balanced league. And so I'm really interested and there's so many teams. I'm really interested in how that league will play out. Uh, Even though I favor Oklahoma State, by no means do I think the Cowboys have it locked up. I think it's kind of wide open, and I will be real curious about the runner-up, the top 2 teams in that league.
Yeah, me too, John. Obviously, you and I are working on Saturdays, and our eyes are going wherever the job takes us. But I'm just thinking, if you're John Q. college football fan, I'm thinking you got like 3 TVs in your living room. You want whatever your favorite team is on the big screen or whatever the top 10 matchup is on the big screen. But if it were me, on those 2 little side TVs, I'd have Big 12 games probably on because I think it's going to be one of the most fun conferences, probably the most fun conference in the country this year. Not saying they have the best teams, but as we said, top to bottom, I think that conference race might be the most compelling. All right, let's go next to the Big 10, and then we'll wrap up with the SEC before we get to at-large bids. From the Big 10, I'm not going to try to get too clever or cute here. I think Ohio State is one of the 2 best teams in the country. I think they're plenty good enough to win the Big 10. I know there's a lot of buzz surrounding Oregon for good reason. I think Oregon's the second best team in that conference, but I think the arguments for Oregon really kind of ignore what Ohio State has assembled. I mean, really, to me, it comes down to Georgia or Ohio State between the best roster in the country. And I think you and I give a slight nod to Georgia because of Carson Beck. We really like him as a quarterback. But if you took the quarterback out of the equation and just looked at the other 21 guys on both sides of the ball, I think I'd probably go Ohio State with having the best team in the country. Now, you can't do that. The quarterback means a lot. But with Will Howard at quarterback, the Kansas State transfer, I think he's plenty good enough for Ohio State to win the Big Ten. I don't know if he's good enough for them to win the national championship, but that's not what we're talking about right here. And so I'm not going to overthink this. I know, Ryan Day, he's become a target for a lot of football fans and folks in the media when they talk about most overrated coaches. And Ryan Day hasn't won the big one yet, but who does he always lose to? He always lost to Jim Harbaugh. We don't have to worry about Jim Harbaugh anymore. Nobody else in the Big Ten has been beating Ryan Day and Ohio State. He beats everybody else when it comes to the Big Ten. So I'm not really, I think because of the expectations there and because of what came before him, he pops up on that list of overrated coaches. But I don't really know if Ryan Day's that much overrated. He just couldn't beat Harbaugh. He doesn't have to worry about Harbaugh anymore. I think he wins the Big Ten.
I agree. And you go back just 2 years to 2022, a national champion Georgia team. That was Ohio State's loss that in the semifinals. In that game, that was just a very thin line of disparity between those two teams. Ohio State was just as good as Georgia. Georgia pulled that thing out. All the credit to Georgia. Stetson Bennett was so clutch, but that was a really good team. And so I don't feel like, and let's face it, if Ohio State wins that game, does anybody think it would have lost to the national championship game? No. So, Ryan Day then would have his national championship. I think sometimes we get too fixated on, well, he hadn't won a national championship. When somebody says that, I always say, well, Les Miles won one, and Ed Orgeron won a national championship. Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing you can say right now,
running your program than Ryan Day?
No, you wouldn't. And the other thing you can say to that argument is, okay, let's rattle off the coaches who have won national championships. There's only 3 right now that are still coaching: Kirby, Dabo, and Mac Brown. And I don't think you'd trade at this stage in their career. Mac Brown's done a nice job at UNC, but you're not going to trade Ryan Day for Mac Brown. So, yeah, if the argument is, well, he hasn't won a national championship, well, it's a pretty short list of guys still coaching who have. So we're in agreement on Oklahoma State. We're in an agreement on Ohio State. I suspect we may be in agreement on the SEC, but let's get there next. Our final automatic bid. John, you going with a sleeper? I know how much you like Ole Miss's roster. Or do you take Ole Miss to get to Atlanta, but no further? You going chalk with Georgia?
I think I'll take Ole Miss to get to Atlanta, but not get past Georgia. The advantage to me, you brought it up, Georgia over Ohio State. It's Carson Beck at quarterback. He's clearly a better passer than Will Howard. Howard's a good runner. And I think when you get into the playoff, Beck could be the difference if those teams met, but I'm not. It would be a close call because Ohio State has 6 first or second team All-Americans, 6 on the Associated Press team. That's a lot of players to make first or second team All-American. But Georgia, again, it's got really good players at pretty much every position. I'm counting on Dylan Bell being a big play wide receiver. They've played him at running back a little bit. He can throw the ball. I think he could be, particularly after Ra Thomas kind of just had too many criminal activities. Kirby finally had to boot him. So that, to me, will create more opportunities for Dylan Bell. I think he will be the star receiver for that team this year. But Georgia didn't have as many playmakers maybe as usual, but it has a good group of running backs. Trevor Etienne could be a star. Beck's good, and the defense will be solid. So it's just really hard to pick against Georgia, and especially against Kirby Smart.
I totally agree, John. And like I said, January is the time for fantasy land. Mid-August here is the time to get serious. And if we're being serious, it's silly to pick someone other than Georgia to win the SEC with what Kirby Smart has assembled again this year. Like you said, the defense is going to be good. They're going to miss Brock Bowers a little bit, sure. But I think one of the highest impact transfers in the SEC this year, and a guy that maybe hasn't gotten as much buzz as some others because of the position he plays, is Trevor Etienne. I mean, Georgia won its back-to-back national championships without a 1,000-yard rusher. They had a handful of good running backs that year, but they didn't have a 1,000-yard rusher. Well, I think Etienne, behind that really solid offensive line, he could be the best running back Georgia's had in a few years. So, Yeah, they're going to miss Bowers, but having a 1,000-yard rusher could help offset that a little bit. And I still think they have some playmakers at wide receiver too. Nobody as good as Bowers, but they still have some good players with Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell, and others. So yeah, I'm not going to overthink it. It's Georgia as the logical pick in the SEC. Okay, so we're in agreement on 3 for the auto bids, in disagreement on 2, but we could still have one of those teams pop up in our at-large. So I'll start us off with an at-large team, John. I know how much you like Ole Miss. I don't know if I'm quite as far on Ole Miss as you are, but I'm pretty far down the well on them too. I think Lane Kiffin has always been good at mining the portal for talented transfers. What he did even better than usual this year was getting playmakers on defense. These aren't just warm bodies on defense, but guys like Walter Nolan on the defensive line, and really at every stage of the defense, every level, D-line, linebackers, secondary. He grabbed plug-and-play transfers who have SEC experience and are going to elevate that defense. The offense is going to be good. The schedule is really accommodating as well. One of the most tailor-made schedules in the SEC for a playoff run. So it's without too much hesitation that I take Ole Miss as one of my at-large.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Lane Kiffin, one of the if you're being negative about Ole Miss, one thing, well, Lane Kiffin is yet to win the game for all he's done. But usually and oftentimes at least when that's the case, he didn't win the big game because he didn't have the best team. It's not complicated. A lot of times I've seen it in the NFL with Super Bowls and championship games, in college football playoff games. They weren't the best team. They lost. It wasn't because their coach was terribly inferior. It just wasn't the best team. This is his best team at Ole Miss.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Lane Kiffin's a really good coach. I love what he's done with the portal. Players come from all areas when you look in that portal. What he's doing, when you can get other SEC players like Walter Nolan from Texas A&M, when you take a starter off another SEC team's roster, that really says something. That tells you they've got it going on there in the NIL department. They got it. Who's it? Chris Paul from Arkansas.
Yeah, the linebacker.
Really productive linebacker. So yeah, he's not just getting quantity from the portal, he's getting real quality there. So I just think this is, as well as he's done at Ole Miss, this is the first time I look at his depth chart and I think, I don't see any glaring weaknesses there. I don't see where they're going to really be victimized in any certain area. They might not be at good. Yeah, they lost Quinshon Judkins to Ohio State in the transfer portal. They don't have a superstar running back, but they're solid at running back with some depth. They have one of the nation's best receiving corps.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at it's a veteran offensive line with some depth. I mean, they've got 7 offensive linemen with starting experience. And the defense, this should be his best defense at Ole Miss. Put it all together, and I just think Ole Miss is a strong favorite to me for an at-large bid.
Yeah, I agree. And you were right to mention the wide receiving core. Yeah, they lost Quinshon Judkins. You can't deny that stings a little bit, and they do have some depth there, but you'd rather have Quinshon Judkins in the room. But they got, as you put it correctly, I think, one of the best wide receiver classes, not just in the SEC, but also the country. So we're in agreement on Ole Miss. So we got 6 teams apiece with a couple differences. How about another at-large team for you? And we'll see if I got them on my list as well.
You want to stay in the SEC and get rid of all those SEC at-large teams first?
However you want to do it. We can stay in the SEC for now. Sure.
Okay. I'll go with Tennessee. You mentioned Ole Miss's schedule. I think Tennessee's schedule is very accommodating. Tennessee could be favored in every game but 2. I could see it being a slight underdog on the road in Norman, Oklahoma in September, and a slight favorite maybe over Alabama in Neyland Stadium in October, and certainly an underdog against Georgia in November. Uh, Three biggest games are in different months. I think the schedule is nicely balanced. There's some buffer games in between the tough games. And overall, if you look beyond Ole Miss and Missouri, I would say of all the playoff contenders in the SEC, Tennessee has the most favorable schedule. I can find a really easy path to a 10-2 record for Tennessee. And if one of your losses is to Georgia and another's to Oklahoma and Norman, and you get a win over Alabama, not to mention a win over NC State in September in the second game, neutral site in Charlotte. That's a big game for Tennessee. So I just really like this offense with Nico Yamaleava at quarterback. I think he's going to be a superstar. You put that kind of quarterback in the kind of offense that Josh Heupel puts out there, a veteran offensive line, proven receivers, a good running back. I think you're going to have a 40-point per game offense again, which he had 2 years ago and almost just shy of that 3 years ago in his first season.
All right. Well, here we have a difference in our at-large list because I have Tennessee on the outside looking in. I've had the Vols at 9-3 for a while now. That's one of my predictions that really hasn't changed. I think they lose to Georgia. I think they lose to Alabama. And I think their defense is going to catch up with them in one other game, which we've seen the last couple of years. They got boat raced in Columbia last year. Their defense got beat over the head by the Tigers. Same thing happened a couple of years ago in Columbia, South Carolina. Maybe they should just avoid trips to Columbia, period, whichever one we're talking about. But I think that trip to Norman in September is going to be a tougher game than a lot of Vols fans expect. I mean, yeah, Oklahoma might finish 7-5 this year because of how tough their schedule is. But winning in Norman in the first SEC game ever for Oklahoma, I mean, that place is going to be riled up. I just don't trust Tennessee's defense enough to take them to the playoff. And also that week 2 game against NC State, it's a little bit more of a coin flip game, I think, than people realize as well. NC State's pretty good. I'd favor the Vols in that one, but I favor Oklahoma in the week 4 game. So I'm going to have one that I don't know if is on your list since I don't have Tennessee. I've got LSU making the playoff. And even though I mentioned them as my second at large, I kind of look at them as one of the final teams in. But I've gone back and forth with LSU. How much do I trust that defense? I don't think it can be any worse, but how much better will it be? Because they're bound to take at least a small step back on offense with the loss of Jaden Daniels and those star wide receivers. But I still think they have plenty of firepower on offense. You know, I've been high on Garrett Nussmeier for a while. They won their bowl game with Nussmeier at quarterback. I still think the offense is going to be solid, going to be one of the better offenses in the SEC. So the defense just has to improve to being average, and I think LSU can get to the playoff. I also like they have a pretty tough schedule, but they play most of their toughest games at home. They have LSU they host Ole Miss, they host Alabama, and they host Oklahoma. I think if they're going to make the playoff, they probably need to get 2 out of those 3 because they might drop one somewhere else along the line. They play Southern Cal, they go to the Swamp, they go to College Station. It's a tough schedule, but I think if they can win 2 of those 3 at home, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Oklahoma, they've got a path to the playoff. So this is the one I probably feel the most concerned about. They're one of my last ones in, I would say, but I have LSU. I don't have Tennessee. I'm curious whether you have LSU on your list.
I don't. I do think the defense will be somewhat better, but it was just so porous last season. And I like Garrett Nussmeier too. But man, they're losing tremendous players on the Heisman Trophy winner, Jaden Daniels at quarterback, who I guess he could start as a rookie in the NFL. He's that good, and 2 great receivers. I think they'll again have good receivers to go with Nussmeier. I think a big key for LSU, if it comes up with a star running back. LSU's just been okay at running. back lately. In the past, we're accustomed to it having big time running backs, maybe two future pros at running back. I like what little I saw of Caleb Jackson last year as a freshman, and I wonder if he could have a breakout season. Love that offensive line. And I think that's a great starting point when you have a good offensive line, probably the best offensive tackle tandem in the country with Emory Jones and Will Campbell. So, yeah, it's a close call on these SEC teams, and I think it really kind of comes down to the schedule and how tough or how tough it isn't. So, but I don't have LSU, no.
Okay, so we got one difference there in our at large. I'm wondering if we agree on this one. I'll offer the next one up. We'll stay in the SEC. Might as well stay there. I've got Alabama making it, John, and this is one where I've pivoted from where I was at in late January. Late January, you had, oh my gosh, the GOAT has retired. Caleb Downs is transferring. Isaiah Bond is transferring. The sky is falling in Tuscaloosa. And then in the sobering light of August, you realize Alabama still has one of the best rosters in the country, still has one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the country, Jalen Milroe, who I think will improve under a quarterback friendly coach in Kalen DeBoer. They have a solid offensive line that should be better than the offensive line last year, which was quite frankly up and down. I think this offensive line will be better. I question whether they have the typical amount of playmakers on the perimeter that Alabama was accustomed to. I don't know if they're good in the back end of the defense. I don't think they're among my top couple picks anyway to win the national championship. But yeah, it's a tough schedule, but I think Alabama is going to be favored in probably at least 10 games on that schedule. And you just look at Kalen DeBoer's track record. I know he hasn't done it yet in the SEC. Sure, he's got to prove himself. But heck, he took Washington to the national championship game in year 2. Washington to the national championship game. Took him just 2 seasons. I think he can get Alabama to the playoffs in year 1.
Yeah, I think much of the discussion about Alabama begins with what it's lost. It lost arguably the greatest coach of all time in college football in Nick Saban. But I think it gained something in Kalen DeBoer. I think the offensive potential could be better with him as a head coach long term. That's saying a lot because Saban put some really good offenses out there, but he couldn't keep his offensive coordinators, Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian. So I think Alabama can keep Kalen DeBoer as the head coach, and he's a really good offensive coach. So I think Alabama will make the playoff too. It lost Isaiah Bond as a wide receiver, but it's got some, I think, great potential at wide receiver with some young guys like Ryan Williams and Caleb Odom. I look for Alabama to be good offensively under Kalen DeBoer. I think it'll be better at running back as well with Justice Haynes and Jam Miller. So Alabama, I've kind of changed my mind on Alabama. I had it kind of on the borderline. Can it make the playoff? I'm not sure. But the further along we got, the more I gave it the edge. Yeah, I think it can make the playoff.
All right, so we each got 3 at-large teams. How about another one from you, John? You got another one for the SEC? I'm sure you do.
Yeah,
you're not saving any spots for the little guys, are you?
And this is one. Well, this is the little guy in a way. I'm going with Texas A&M.
Whoa. This is a late change. I'm glad we did.
Yeah,
we did these final picks because I did not know you were all in on A&M, but we've both been improving our outlook on the Aggies. So give me the pitch here.
Yeah, don't I always at this time of year?
Yes,
I'm always convinced this will be the Aggies' year, and I think you fall victim to that line of thinking as well. However, I think they've got a coaching improvement with Mike Elko. I think they've got really good depth on that roster, depth of talent. Even though they lost a good running back in Reuben Owens, where they were 3 deep, they're definitely 2 deep there with Amari Daniels and Le'Veon Moss. I think they'll be really strong at running back. I like their offensive line. I think this could be a very good team, but my real decisive factor in moving the Aggies, slipping them in just under the playoff wire, was that schedule.
Mm-hmm.
It's all the tough games, all the games against nationally ranked teams. They don't have to go to any hostile venues for those games. They play non-conference game against Texas A&M. That could pay huge dividends for the Aggies. And then the clincher to me would be the finale in College Station against Texas. Uh, I've changed my mind on Texas and my mind on A&M, and I think A&M wins that game. And that game is going to be a playoff game in,
Yeah.
essence. I think A&M.
I agree with that game, John. That could be an
Do you?
elimination game for one of those two teams. You mentioned we're going to know a lot about A&M after week one, that non-conference opener in Kyle Field against Notre Dame. That would just be a crippling blow to Notre Dame's playoff chances if they lost, and really be wind at the sails for the Aggies. The home games, as you pointed out, that they're playing their toughest opponents at home: Notre Dame, Missouri, LSU, Texas, all at home. I don't have A&M in, but I like this pick. I was tempted by it too. I keep improving my pecking order on A&M as it gets closer to the season as well. The schedule factors into it. I guess maybe maybe subconsciously I'm picking Texas to win that game in College Station because I have A&M out. I have Texas in, although I am cooling a little bit on Texas. They've suffered some injuries at running back. I don't think their defense is going to be quite as strong this year. I think their offensive line is going to be one of the best in the SEC. That line is built like an SEC offensive line. They reloaded at wide receiver with some really good transfers, including Isaiah Bond from Alabama. I think the defense will still be good, maybe not as good as last year. At one time I probably would have said Texas 11-1. Now I think I'm down to 10-2. I have them as kind of one of my last at-large teams in the field. So I flip A&M to Texas, but I really don't mind your pick at all. I think that's pretty tempting. So there's our 5 at-large teams from the SEC. Assuming you don't go any further, I don't want to spoil the surprise. We'll see. But so far, no, we only have 4,
No,
right, John?
we have 4.
Yeah,
But
we got one more.
put Georgia. That's
5
teams for
Do
the
we have a
SEC.
6th? I got a 6th on my list. You got one more at large from the SEC?
No.
You do not.
No.
Okay. Well, do you have another team for us then?
Yeah, an at-large team. I've still got. Let's see. Okay, let's go to the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
Go with Oregon. I think it's clearly the second best team in that league. Love Dylan Gabriel at quarterback, and I really like Evan Stewart, the transfer wide receiver from Texas A&M. Man, I'm surprised A&M could. I wondered about that move though. A&M doesn't come up short on money. We know that. Jimbo Fisher will vouch for that. He's gone because the Aggies have plenty of money. Why couldn't they keep Evan Stewart? It makes me wonder how badly they wanted Evan Stewart. Is that something we don't know about? I mean, he's a very talented receiver, big play guy, and he moves to Oregon, but A&M still has a solid receiving core. So maybe I'm giving him too much credit, but I really like Dylan Gabriel at quarterback. I like Dan Lanning at coach. If just for that Colorado speech last year, if nothing else. No, I think he's done a nice job there. So I'll go with Oregon. I don't. That's probably one of my surest at-large picks. Even though the SEC is a stronger league, I just think Oregon's going to be the second best team in that league. When you look at the Big Ten, really, to me, the top 2 spots are kind of taken. Ohio State clearly number 1, and Oregon to me certainly number 2.
I agree, John. No debate about anything you just said. I think Oregon is the number 2 team in the Big Ten. I think they're closer to number 1 than they are to number 3. I feel really good about Ohio State and Oregon to the playoff from the Big Ten. After that, gets a little bit interesting. And I misspoke earlier, John. I just have 5 SEC teams, just as you did. I thought about a 6. I thought about giving yet one more at-large
Well,
bid to the SEC after teasing you about not standing up for the little guy. I almost gave the SEC 6 spots, but in the end, I did go another direction. So we're in agreement on Oregon. That leaves 2 at-large spots left. I'm going to finish it up with my final team from the Big Ten. I only have one more from the Big Ten. I have the Big Ten as a 3-bid league. At one time, I thought about the Big Ten as a 4-bid league. I've cooled on Michigan. I have not cooled on Penn State. I love Penn State's schedule. If I was a Penn State fan, I'd say, yeah, give me this schedule every year. They'll probably lose to Ohio State. They usually do. But this schedule does not have Oregon. This schedule does not have Michigan. And what's the critique on James Franklin every year? He can't win the big games. Okay, no, usually doesn't. But he almost always wins the games he's supposed to win. And I think Penn State's going to be favored in about 10 games this year, 10, maybe even 11. They're very solid in the backfield, as they always are. You can always depend on Penn State to have 2 frontline running backs, and they do again this year. They're going to be really good on defense. Question with Penn State is, do they have a quarterback to win the big game? They probably still don't, but I don't know that they need one to get to 10-2 when you have Katron Allen and Nick Singleton in the backfield, a 1-2 punch that can combine for 2,000 yards between the two of them. So I have Penn State as my 3rd Big Ten team. I'm curious, do you have 3 Big Ten teams as well, at least, or where are you going for your next one?
Yes, I do have 2 at-large teams from the Big Ten, and it's not Penn State.
Okay.
I really don't like the quarterback, and yeah, it's got good running backs, and the schedule is certainly accommodating. But I think there will be some games where it's going to need the quarterback to step up, and I don't think Drew Aller can do that. Where he's going to have to throw effectively in the clutch. I just don't see that happening. I think Penn State will lose right out of the gate at Morgantown against West Virginia.
That might be some affinity bias. You've always liked West Virginia.
Well, maybe so, but that's a hostile venue. And I know James Franklin has a history of winning the games he's supposed to win, but Penn State has stumbled before in openers. So I think West Virginia's a threat in the Big 12 this year. Came on strong last season. So I don't have Penn State in there. I just think this is a year where it loses games it's supposed to win, and mainly because of the quarterback. And you're going to hate my next at-large pick.
I'm sure I will, because I know where you're going.
I don't think you do.
Okay.
Go ahead. Guess who I'm going to pick.
You're going to pick Southern Cal, aren't you?
No.
Okay. Thank goodness.
Guess again.
Well, you said it's from the Big Ten. You're not picking Penn State. You're not picking Southern Cal. I don't think you're that high on Michigan with the change from Jim Harbaugh. No. I'm kind of wondering what Big Ten teams are left to tempt you. You've stumped me, John.
Okay, I'm picking Iowa.
Punter you. They do have well, tell us the pitch, but I got an idea why, and I think it's going to follow kind of your A&M pitch here, but let's hear it.
Well, yeah, start with the schedule.
There we go.
And I know it's track record. No offense, but it has no offense. However, it finds ways to win games. And Cade McNamara would have been the quarterback last year if not for injury. He's an upgrade. And Tim Lester, an offensive coordinator, is an upgrade. And I love that schedule. And as boring as Iowa can be, it's one of the most resourceful teams in the country. And I look at that schedule, and I think it'll find ways to win these games against teams of similar caliber like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska. Don't you put all those teams kind of in the same box?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. You just wonder, okay, how will they score? How will they get in the end zone? And, I certainly didn't go into this thinking, I'll probably pick Iowa as an large team. I had no idea. And I started looking at the Big Ten, and I've got 2 teams. I don't like Michigan. I don't like Penn State. I looked at Wisconsin. I don't like Wisconsin. I just kept eliminating teams. And I said, what about Iowa?
Yeah, this one blows my mind, John, and I'm glad you brought it up. I mean, I like that you trash my pick of Penn State, so they don't have enough offense, they don't have a quarterback, and then you pick the team that's been an inferior version of Penn State for about the last decade. The team that always beats the teams it's supposed to beat, always loses the big games, never has a quarterback that can win the big games. You Penn State, and then you pick the clone of Penn State that just has been a little bit worse, been not quite as good as Penn State, not quite as much talent, but they're the Penn State of the Big Ten West. Well, the Big Ten West is gone now, and you've suddenly leapfrogged Iowa
Thank
over
goodness.
over Penn State. Yeah, thank goodness it's gone.
Yeah.
You say you're out on Penn State because you think they're going to lose to West Virginia. Well, here's why I'm out on Iowa. They're going to get crushed by Ohio State. Even you probably believe that. But maybe
Yeah.
where we differ, I think they lose in week 2 against Iowa State. I think Iowa State's going to be one of the most improved teams in the country. Almost their entire roster is back, including their starting quarterback, who's a freshman last year. So I think they're losing in week 2 to Iowa State. And if you can't beat Iowa State, you can't make the playoffs. But I like that you're backing punter U for the playoffs. It would just be a hilarious plot if it happens.
Didn't it lose its punter? Am I right on that?
I
I kind of think it might have, but I bet
well, you know, it probably has 3 good ones lined up and reserved. It's the most important player on the roster at Iowa.
Well, I've kind of got. I have to admit that's another state, an underrated state in my mind. I like Iowa, the state, and love Caitlin Clark.
Yeah, this
I was
is
on the
total
Iowa
affinity.
campus. I was on the Iowa campus in May, so my wife could get a Caitlin Clark jersey. So yeah, I'm going with the Hawkeyes, and really makes it really on paper it looks like a ridiculous pick. I have to admit.
I got engaged in Iowa, John, so I got nothing against
There you
Iowa.
go.
But
Okay.
I did it in a casino. But if I was in a casino, I would not be betting on Iowa to make the playoff.
Which was this like in Bettendorf, Iowa?
Oh gosh, I think it was
Riverboat?
I'm forgetting the town where I got engaged now. It's somewhere in southeast Iowa. It wasn't Bettendorf. I'll
Let's
come
see.
up with it
There's
and let you know.
is Davenport?
I
That's
think
in
it was
Illinois.
Davenport, I
See, those are
believe.
the Quad Cities. Are you
No, it
sure it
wasn't.
wasn't?
No, it wasn't Davenport either. It was the one with the minor league baseball team that's the Bees. Burlington, Iowa. They got a casino
Where,
in Burlington, got
where
engaged
is
there.
that?
They have a minor league baseball team called the Burlington Bees. It was not at a minor league game. It was in the winter, and won money actually at the blackjack tables. My then fiance, now wife, and I both walked away winners. Had that newly engaged good luck. I think I was going to need a little luck if they're going to make the playoffs. They're also going to need some points, which usually is a problem for them.
You're such a romantic.
Hey, she said yes.
Yeah,
what's wrong with the casino?
A riverboat casino.
It wasn't a riverboat. It was a physical structure. We were floating on
okay.
the
Well, I'm
river.
used to those riverboat casinos there in Bettendorf. One of the most depressing places I've ever seen, as far as casinos go. And I think a lot of casinos are very depressing. But I just can't even. What's the name of the town again? Burlington.
Yeah, Burlington. The minor league team there is the Burlington
The
Bees. That's how
Bees.
I
Yeah.
finally remembered it. Yeah, we had a nice dinner on the river in Burlington. The restaurant was on the river. The casino's on the other side of town. And then we went back had a hotel room in the casino, and yeah, popped the question.
Great.
Then we went down and won a bunch of money on the blackjack table. Some guy gave us $50 of his own money to play at the tables. We won money on his money and our money. It was a great night. Great night. So nothing but fond memories for Iowa, but don't share your love for the Hawkeyes to the playoffs. Final pick, John. I think we've got our allotment of SEC teams. We've got our allotment of Big Ten teams. This one could go any which way. I'm wondering, do you go Notre Dame? Do you go ACC as a 2-bid league? Big 12? I'll tell you where I'm going. I'm going to Utah and giving the Big 12 2 bids. Offense was a struggle last year for Utah, but Cameron Rising is back at quarterback. When he was last year quarterback, they won the Pac-12 in 2022. He missed all of last season. Utah's defense, it's always going to be solid. I'm a little bit hesitant to go with a second team from the Big 12 just because I think all those teams are pretty equal. They could beat up on each other a little bit, but I think I think Oklahoma State and Utah are a bit better than the rest. And so I will take Utah with my final at-large spot.
Okay, we've got another game to mark on the schedule then, because we've got that Iowa State game
Mm-hmm.
to look forward to, where we go head to head and varying beliefs on the outcome. My other at-large pick is Arizona.
I thought about them. That game's in Utah, which
I
maybe
know it
is
is. I
one
just
reason
think,
why I went with Utah.
yeah, I don't think Utah is going to be quite as strong as it's been in some of those Pac-12 teams, like Cam Rising and quarterback, certainly. But Arizona's got a lot more offense, I think, and that to me will be the edge. Wildcats finished really strong last year, so I'll go with Arizona.
Yeah, I like Arizona as well. And I think if that game wasn't in Utah, I might have went with Arizona with my final pick. Noah Fafita, one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12. They also got a standout wide receiver. What's his name? His last name is McMillan. His first name's a mouthful. I would butcher it, so I'm not going to try. But yeah, great quarterback wide receiver combination at Arizona State. So I actually like that pick, John, better than your Iowa pick. Your Iowa pick's probably my least favorite of your at-large selections. How about mine? From the list of, let's say, LSU, who you don't have, Penn State, you don't have them, and Utah, you don't have them. Which one do you feel like is the longest shot of my three at large that you don't have on the list?
I think all of those are reasonable picks, logical picks. Mine is very illogical. So I don't look at yours and say, "Oh my God, what is he thinking? What's wrong with him?" No, I look at mine. I'm wondering if anybody else in the country would put Iowa in the playoff.
Well, they're ranked. They're number 25 in the polls. I just like that you gave me multiple guesses at which wild card you were taking from the Big Ten. And even though I was ranked, they were so far off my mind as a playoff team, I couldn't come up with them. But nothing but love for the casino in Burlington, Iowa. And if you stop in and hit the blackjack tables, tell them SEC Football Unfiltered sent you. And we hope you're back with us next week. Thanks for listening to today's episode of SEC Football Unfiltered.